When I was a kid, my family and I lived next door to a truly terrifying older woman. Kids would dare each other to run up and knock on her door, but no one ever actually did. She always wore a long black dress and had stringy white hair. Her eyes were sunken in and dark, and she never seemed to blink. She would just stand at her front window, staring out at her garden for hours on end. Unfortunately for me, my bedroom window faced her garden and front window. I would catch her staring at me through my bedroom window, and it would send chills down my spine. She would just stand there, motionless, while I tried my best to hide. I was never sure what she was thinking, but it felt like she was planning something truly sinister. During this time, I was in the 11th grade, and I would have to walk by her house every day on my way home from school. An older man named Mike would tend to her garden for her. He was a nice old man, and he would always say hello to me, but I never dared to stop and talk to him for too long. I was too afraid of the old lady who lived in that house. She was always scowling at anyone who dared walk by. As I walked by her house on this day, it just felt different. It was Halloween and all, but I could feel something just wasn't right. Maybe it was the way the wind was blowing, or the fact that all the lights in her house were off. But whatever it was, I couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was about to happen. It suddenly hit me that Mike, the gardener, wasn't there. I frantically looked around the yard, but he was nowhere to be found. I started to feel sick to my stomach as my mind raced with possibilities of what could have happened to him, but I couldn't bring myself to go ask her. I finally got the courage to look up at her window. There was that wretched old woman. She was standing there smiling at me. She knew I knew something really bad had happened to Mike. I stood there in shock, staring back at her until a crow's caws snapped me out of the fear I was feeling. As I looked up, my eyes instantly went to the direction where all the racket was coming from. I could see a scarecrow in her backyard and realized that it was wearing Mike's jacket and overalls. A crow was on its shoulder cawing and flapping its wings insanely. I ran as fast as I could home and locked all the doors. I was so afraid that I hid in our basement until my parents got home for dinner. As we ate dinner, I forgot about what I had seen. It may have just been one of those Halloween scares anyway. Later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, I began to hear a noise outside my window. It sounded like a very faint tapping on the glass of my window. I thought to myself that I had already had enough scares for one night. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, but the tapping persisted. Bang, bang, bang. I heard a loud crashing at my window. Suddenly, that crow from earlier began frantically pecking at my window and cawing wildly. It slammed its wings hard against the glass, scaring me half to death. As I looked out the window, the crow immediately flew off. I watched as the old lady next door was levitating 6 feet off the ground. Her arms, legs, and head were contorted backwards. She lifted her head back up, shrieked with a blood-curdling scream, and pointed at my direction. I watched as the scarecrow fell from its pole in the backyard and began running towards our home. As it got closer, I could see that it was Mike. His eyes blackened and soulless. His body was contorted, and he looked to be in incredible pain as he ran towards our house. I watched as Mike threw his lifeless body into our front door. Over and over he threw his body against our house. He would fall down, get back up, and slam himself into our home over and over. As I watched from the window, I could see that my neighbor was controlling his body now. Her arms were flailing madly, controlling him as he rammed his body hard into our door. He screamed and pleaded with us not to open the door. He was still in control of his mind, but she had full control of his body. Awoken by all the noise, my parents ran into my room and watched in horror at what was unfolding at our front door. Minute after minute passed with Mike ramming his lifeless body into our home. Then, as the clock struck midnight, he fell to the ground, and smoke began billowing out of that old witch's home. Fire tore through that old house, making her survival almost impossible. Mike suffered severe blunt force trauma, but it baffled his doctors as it was all mainly internal damage. The old woman's body was never recovered from the fire, and her location is still unknown to this day. For more stories just like this, please subscribe to our channel.